Hi everyone, this is Dr. Seymour. This narrated PowerPoint is on word identification with the strategies context clues and morphemic analysis. So word identification is different than phonics instruction. Recognizing a word is different than identifying a word. Recognizing is more automatic and the student is not using any type of strategy. They just see a word and automatically know what the word is. When students don't recognize a word, they need to use a word identification strategy to determine the word and its meaning. And one way to do this is through context clues. In reading and listening, a context clue is information such as a definition, synonym, anonym, or example that appears near a word or phrase and offers direct or indirect suggestions about its meaning. So in other words, as a student's reading a passage and they come across a word they don't know, they can read around the word to determine what the word may be and what it means. This isn't a strategy that students with reading disabilities know to do automatically, so we have to teach this skill or strategy. And there's two ways you can teach students to use context clues to determine a word they don't know. The first one I discuss is the cloze method, and the second way is the maze method. So context clues use a semantic cueing system, which is any activity when one word or part of a word is missing. So semantic cues are gained through using knowledge of known words which precede or follow the unknown word. So for example, if a student saw the sentence, Sam likes to blank video games, and they're provided with the letter P to give them a hint for the word, they can fairly easily determine what the missing word is using prior knowledge or their knowledge of video games to determine the missing word is play. So if you know some of your students may have difficulties with word identification, you can use context clues to teach them to figure out a word and its meaning. And this is a short lesson you can do with your class or with your students each day to give them practice learning new words that they will use in your content area classes, especially new and difficult or multi-syllable words. When doing these activities, you just want to keep it simple and the pacing brisk. You should just use 1 to 6 sentences at a time, and the activity shouldn't take more than 3 to 6 minutes a day working on context clues. And the purpose of it would be to develop students' ability to use context clues or semantic cueing, not necessarily to do context clue activities. So you would use context clues when you're teaching reading comprehension, but for this, we're not necessarily just teaching reading comprehension. We're trying to teach them how to identify words that they don't know. The real practice comes through independent reading practice. The process for using and teaching the context clue strategy is quite simple. First, you're going to find or create a closed sentence or several closed sentences. And you can use sentences from a book or passage that the students are using in your class. Then you're going to present the sentence with the word covered or partly covered. And then you ask the students, what word would make sense in this sentence? Reread the complete sentence and then ask the students if the sentence makes sense with the word that they suggest. Show them the sentence and then ask them to reread it. And you can do this practice daily on the whiteboard or give students a worksheet to work independently or with a partner. But it's just a short little lesson that you can do each day at the beginning of class just to give them practice with using context clues to figure out what a word is, to do word identification. So that's the cloze method. The maze is an alternative way of practicing with context clues. It's similar to semantic cueing analysis because you can use a passage of text that you are using in your class. The difference is instead of giving the hint of what the word starts with, the students have a sentence with 2 or 3 alternative words to choose from. And so they use context clues to determine the word and its meaning. So for example, in the text on the screen, you see that after the initial sentence, every sixth or seventh word has a choice of 3 words to choose from. And so the students have to choose which word would make sense in that sentence. So it's helping them, choose a different word for the sentence, and it later helps with their reading comprehension. But for now, it's giving them suggestions of 3 choices to choose from, and then using context clues around there to determine the word and its meaning. So using context clues through the maze or closed methods helps students to not only learn new words, but identify appropriate words that make sense in a text, which leads to better reading comprehension. The next strategy for word identification is morphemic analysis, and morphology is extremely important in the literacy world. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning within a word, and a word may have several morphemes. As you can see on the slide, the word desire is a morpheme, and desire means to want or need or to long for. And when you add to the word, you're adding additional morphemes, and that changes the meaning of the word. And these additional morphemes are typically prefixes, suffixes, and root words. And by adding the morpheme able to desire, it changes the word to desirable, but it also changes the meaning to wanted or needed or looked for or suitable. Then if you add ity to desirable, it changes again the meaning of the word to attractiveness or appeal or appropriateness. Lastly, if we add the morpheme un to desirability, it becomes undesirability. And again, it changes the meaning to not attractive or not appealing or not appropriate. So teaching students to use the strategy of morphemic analysis involves teaching students to use prefixes, suffixes, and root words to identify unknown words. You would first teach them the different prefixes, suffixes, and root words and their meanings, and then teach them to look for these morphemes in words to help them identify the word and its meaning. Students who understand words at the morphemic level are better able to get the meaning of words and are better prepared to deal with the increased reading and writing demands across the curriculum and content areas once they hit secondary school. Good readers use their knowledge of morphological structure to recognize complex words. However, students that are struggling readers lack the knowledge of morphological structure, and they'll have more difficulty in recognizing and learning words. Research shows that this awareness of the morphological structure of words is correlated with students' vocabulary knowledge as well as their reading comprehension. So students with learning or language disabilities may experience difficulty with delayed vocabulary and difficulty in defining specific vocabulary words because of a deficit in their knowledge of morphology. So how can instruction help adolescent students with morphology? When adolescent students learn frequently use morphemes, this knowledge improves not only their spelling, but also provides strategies for decoding and for building vocabulary. Learning morphemes helps students, particularly in the upper elementary grades and beyond, as they encounter more unfamiliar words and morphologically complex words across their expository textbooks and narrative literature, as well as in their spelling task. Students with morphological knowledge are better able to separate out the morphemes in meaningful units for use in decoding, comprehending, or spelling the word. So one way to teach students about morphology is to use a word map like this one that you see on this slide. And the word map shows the morphemic analysis of a word and how it's broken into word parts. The word disorganized is broken up into 3 morphemes: dis, organize, and ed, disorganized. And as you teach about morphology, you can give students blank word maps and then have them break up the word into different morphemes. Another strategy for teaching morphology is the inside-out strategy. And you would teach students to look outside the word for clues in neighboring words or sentences, kind of like using the context clues. Then look inside the word for clues using or looking for the prefix, the suffix, and root words. Then have them reread the sentence and make a guess based on the clues, and then see if your sentence makes sense in the sentence. And I would teach this using cognitive modeling, guided learning, and then independent practice. So let me give you some tips for teaching morphemic analysis. First of all, keep it simple. Teach what each morpheme means and how it changes the meaning of the word. And a great way to teach this is to make it visual, like use posters, word walls, or concept maps to teach and reinforce morphemes, prefixes, suffixes, and root words. In order to do morphemic analysis, students need to have some knowledge of root words, prefixes, and suffixes. And I'm briefly going to discuss instruction on each. So a prefix is a word or letter placed before another. The 20 most common prefixes account for 97% of all prefixed words students will encounter. And the 4 most common prefixes account for about 65% of all the prefix words used in school. And these prefixes include un, re, in, and dis. So it makes sense to focus on these 20 prefixes with special attention to the first 4. This slide shows the 20 most common prefixes and their meaning along with an example of each one. Suffixes are morphemes that are added onto the end of root words to change their meaning. 20 most common suffixes account for about 93% of suffixed words that students will encounter, and the 3 most common suffixes make up approximately 64% of all the suffixed words used in school. This slide shows the 20 most common suffixes, their meanings, and an example of each. So instruction should focus on these 20 suffixes and then the most common first 3, which is the plurals, ed, and then ing. So it makes sense to focus on the 20 suffixes and 20 prefixes, given special attention to the first 3 or 4 of them that are the most important. So when teaching about prefixes and suffixes, first you want to show the target word in a sentence. Then you want to show the new prefix or suffix by itself. And then show the target word without the prefix or suffix. And then define the prefix or suffix or help students to find synonyms of it. And I'm going to give you some examples. So an example of how to introduce new prefixes to students. If they were reading this text and it says, I was happy. I lost my shoes and was not happy or unhappy. So you would want to show the target word in the sentence, then show the new prefix, which is un, and then show the target word without the prefix. So it's happy, which turns into unhappy when you add the prefix. And then you want to define the prefix to help the students or either find synonyms. So you're going to explain to them, un means not. And so then you give another example. When you are not sick, you are healthy. When you are sick, you are unhealthy. Healthy, and then when you add un to it, it becomes unhealthy. And un means not healthy. So that's just an example of how you can teach that. Example of how to introduce new suffixes to students. So you would say, I have 1 star and Mary has 2 stars. 1 star, then 2 stars has an S at the end. So star plus an S equals stars. And the S means that you're having more than 1. Another example is, today I will jump. Yesterday I jumped. So show the word jump, then show it with the new suffix, and then teach them what ed means, and that means that it's past tense, and then go through and define it, and then show them some more examples. Another example would be, I like to dance. Right now I am dancing. Dance is the first word, and then when you add your suffix ing, it becomes dancing. And then you would explain what ing means. It's something that you're doing now. All right, now let's talk about root words. Root words are part of the word from which other parts grow, and you make it grow by adding a prefix or a suffix. Some of the root words make sense alone by themselves, and others do not. So to teach about root words, one thing you can do is do an internet search and type in the word etymology followed by the root word, like into Google or something, and it will take you to a site that explains the meaning and history of the root word. This is an activity you can have students do independently or with a partner. Another way to teach about root words is to provide a definition using student language or student definitions of the word, and then also giving them many examples, and then have the students make a poster for the root words. So like you see on the screen, the word form means to shape, and then give them lots of examples of how the root word form can be made into lots of different words, like formula, inform, conform, preform, uniform, transform, inform, and the same with port. And then you can have students make posters out of this that has the root words and all the different examples. And then most importantly, teach the root that students encounter in the text, curriculum, or discussion as the basis for your instruction. So in other words, use the words that students are reading and learning in your content area classes. You don't want to water it down with younger type words to instruct them. Use the curriculum that you have. So like I said at the beginning, morphology is extremely important in the literacy world. Morphology influences spelling, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. It allows students to separate morphemes and their definitions in order to understand a word. It also allows students to understand large words by first understanding the smaller morphemes. And like I said, it has a huge impact on spelling. Okay, we discussed some simple activities or strategies to develop word identification using the semantic cueing system or context clues and morphologic analysis.